I used to run a women's and queers night at a local arts org. I met this person through this named Sabrina. We became really good friends. Honestly, so much of our friendship was really great. We both really loved electronics and we really talked about it a lot. At the time, she had another very good friend. They were inseparable. At one point, she ends up moving in with this friend. Quickly, it goes downhill and I spend more and more time with Sabrina. I hear that her old friend/roommate was really awful in all kinds of irrational ways. It sounded like a really crappy situation. Me and Sabrina get very close. I'm in a really committed long-term relationship with someone else named John. Me and Sabrina end up going on lots of trips together, and at one point Sabrina's computer breaks and I give her my old one. I didn't clear it because she's very computer savvy and I didn't really think much of it. Surely she'd clear it herself, right? At one point in our relationship, John and I decided to have an open relationship. Sabrina says that she likes me and that we should date. I say no. I care about her very much, but I don't want to date her. We get into a pretty big argument, one of many. We always have lots of fights every time I meet men and date them, and she's pretty critical. We talk it over, and I decide not to share that aspect of my life with her anymore. Sabrina moves into my best friend's house, and everything is mostly fine. Mostly. It's really weird, but she doesn't ever speak to any of the other roommates. Like, not a single word to any of them. One day, Sabrina isn't answering me on Messenger, and I know she's been sick. I have my best friend check on her, and she says that she's okay. More time passes, and I go over to check on her. She has diabetes, and she's very, very sick. I call an ambulance, and we go to the hospital. She's having some kind of issue relating to her diabetes. I miss a big talk that I was supposed to give spending the night with her in the hospital, so she's not alone. But not a big deal. She's my friend and she was really in need that night. As time continues, we have some more bizarre fights, but I just assume that they're largely misunderstandings. Some about the people I date, how I use my time, etc. Sabrina house sits for me, confides secrets in me, and we hang out pretty often despite the occasional disagreements. I'm a PhD student, so at one point at the end of the winter semester, I had to take some time on my own to finish my work. I didn't really notice the distance growing, but it had been about a week since we'd seen each other. When I'm buried in my work, I really need my whole brain. She seems sad, so I suggest that she hang out with some of the other mutual friends that we had. Well, she declines. She says that she needs to see me and that she really needs her best friend. I start to feel like I have to be her whole world, a feeling I've had before but just dismissed. This time I feel pretty uncomfortable about it and I try to set some boundaries between us. We have this odd sort of push and pull interaction for a few months following this. She starts ignoring me and then sending me messages or being distant if I ever reach out to her. At one point I suggest that she hangs out with me along with a group of friends and she goes off on me, saying, "You know I hate them. Why are you trying to make this so difficult for me?" I'm very stressed out in general, and I'm actually going to therapy to deal with it. I start to feel really paranoid and just kind of assume it's stress-induced. Eventually, Sabrina messages me on Facebook and she says that we need to talk. I agree, and she says that she discovered what's wrong with her. She basically tells me that I'm all she thinks about and she's absolutely obsessed with me, and it's destroying her. She says that I can't interact with her, that hello is way too much. She asks me to completely disengage with her completely. I'm honestly really baffled, but I agree to try. It's really kind of difficult to do that because she lives with my best friend and is a member of the studio I ran. Something in the back of my brain tells me to check my computer logs, so I do. I find out that Sabrina has been logging into my Google account for 1.5 years. I see her device is currently logged on. If you don't know, you can look at your Google account and see all of the logged in devices. I saw Sabrina's laptop logged in within the last few days, and it said active. I checked the last activity and saw Find My Device. You can also check this on your Google account as well. I've never used this feature personally as I really had no reason to do so. I use Google Activity to check. I'm a pretty meticulous Google Calendar keeper, so I'm able to easily cross-reference just about everything. I can see that she's been using Google Timeline and Find My Device on me every single time that I was out on a date with John or anyone else, or if I was out with someone she didn't know. She had access to all of my photos and videos as well as my chat logs. I can see that she's been checking them. Every photo, where I was, who I was with, what I was saying, etc. I decided to contact a good friend of mine who's very tech savvy to make sure that it couldn't be an accident, and there's no way that it could be. I realized that my stress-induced paranoia was in fact because some part of my brain just knew something was wrong. I can think of multiple incidents that are really huge red flags now. One time I was on a date and she messaged me, "You're in the park, I'm going to come get you," and I just somehow let it slide because I was stupid. I just said, what? No, I'm having a good time here. I can also see that she never used Find My Device when I was home, indicating that she was reading my chat logs or had some other way of knowing where I was. I was also able to correlate her hospital stay with the day that she was tracking me, and I know for a fact that a lot of diabetic issues can be self-induced. I can see now that so many of the fights we had or things that I missed because of her issues were also during times that she was tracking me. All of our arguments about my time in my dating life seemed very clear to me now. I actually find out later that apparently her old roommate had similar issues with her. She was always really worried that Sabrina had put something on their Wi-Fi network or that she was following her, and that's why their relationship decayed so much. Eventually, all of this comes to light between all of our friends. She says that she did this because I made her responsible for my safety, which is absolutely insane. She had also told people that one of the reasons she was following me was because I made her my servant. I mean, what? I feel so messed up from all of this. I realized through correlating journals, calendars, and Google activity logs that she had been fighting with me when I was having intimate conversations with men, or when I was out with people she didn't know. I feel like my stress-induced paranoia was really just my brain knowing that something was going on. While most of her stalking me was while I was on dates, a lot of it was when I was just out with some of my old friends that she didn't know. For example, she used Find My Device when I was at medieval times with a childhood friend and didn't tell her. If I had made her my servant or responsible for my safety, I certainly wasn't in any kind of danger in situations like that. I feel like I'm kind of ripe for this type of thing. I'm very forgiving, especially if I think someone is struggling with something, so I excuse so many red flags. I once saw that she had Twitter notifications for my posts on her phone. I always heard it buzz when I posted. I felt really uncomfortable, but I just let it slide and joked about it. That was really dumb of me. It was clearly a sign, I just didn't realize it could actually be this bad. If you see a red flag or you feel paranoid, maybe check crap out. I don't know, I just wanted to get that off my chest. I'm also really glad that I'm a huge Google Calendar user, which let me build a case in order to prove that it was actually happening. I'm really grateful for that. And Sabrina, wherever you are and whatever you're up to, I really hope you get some help for your really concerning behavior. You really need it. This happened a few years ago. During my sophomore year of college, I suddenly had to switch dorms due to housing and residence life at my university being completely awful to me and a few other student workers. Long story short, I lost my job and I actually had to move within a day. My parents came 5 states away and made a huge fuss in the housing office so that I was able to get more moving time. This is really important later in the story. I used to go on Instagram Live a lot because I'm a music minor and practicing in front of an audience really helps me improve my piano skills. I guess Instagram had begun offering the feature of showing stories and lives on the Explore page, so I ended up getting a lot of views and comments from strangers. Nothing too bad. It was usually just song requests that I couldn't fulfill because I had a strict repertoire from my piano professor or hard eyes from strangers. I used to really enjoy the lives until I got a comment from a man who knew exactly the location of my university. I never wore any kind of school attire during my lives or publicized my location on Instagram, so it made me a little nervous. I stopped doing lives after that for a while, getting caught up in regular work and figured everything was fine. The guy sent me a few messages offering to take me on a date. A quick scan of his profile made it clear that he was at least 50 years old. He worked as a laborer for the city my university is located near. He asked me several times a day what buildings my classes were in, if I liked the cafeteria, etc., until I finally got scared and decided to block him. However, before I blocked him, I called him a pervert and a freaking weirdo for being so interested in me when I was so much younger than him, and for also trying to find me when I was trying to go to class. A few weeks later, after I'd forgotten about his weird messages, I got a message from him saying something along the lines of, "I waited for you in front of your old dorm for hours, but you never showed. Did you go home for the weekend? You shouldn't be so rude to me next time, or else we won't have fun whenever we meet face to face." That message scared me more than I'd ever been scared in my life. One of my really close friends graduated from the university and began working as a campus police officer around the same time that this all happened. So I decided to go see her and see what I could do. Sadly, not much could really be done about it, but I definitely pulled back on my social media presence. The guy had followed me from 2 more Instagram accounts with different usernames, and I blocked all of them before he could even message me. Thankfully, since leaving after that spring semester, I haven't heard from him since. So to the creepy old guy from Instagram that wouldn't leave me alone, I really hope I don't hear from you ever again. Before I get into this, yes, I know I was really dumb. I know that there were millions of times that I probably could have walked away but didn't. I was kind of stubborn, and that often got me into bad situations online. For a little bit of context, at the time I was suffering from a few undiagnosed mental illnesses, with depression, anxiety, and light psychotic symptoms being a few of them. I also had a very tense childhood, so I had a lot of trouble making friends at school. That being said, I was a pretty lonely kid, so I went and still go to the internet for friendship and attention. In 7th grade, I had a not-so-popular Tumblr blog. At the time, there was this movie that I really liked. It was a crappy action movie. The fan base for it was pretty small, and I was super obsessed with it, so whenever I happened upon someone else who also liked it, I would always share their posts and DM them to discuss the movie. I met this guy who I'll call Tom this way. I DM'd him, and immediately he struck me as strange. He typed in a very cheery way, for lack of a better term. He was also immediately very affectionate. It struck me as weird, but I knew that a lot of the people who posted about that movie on Tumblr were from different countries, so I figured it was probably just a language barrier. We talked on and off for the next few months. During this time, he had actually disclosed to me a few personal problems that he had. He said that he felt like no one liked him, and that he was sad all the time, and he felt like the only person that was there for him was me. I never felt insanely responsible for other people's well-being over the internet when I didn't really know them that well. So I basically just said something along the lines of, "Oh, thank you, I'm really glad I can help." And I tried to recommend to him to go see a therapist. There were a few other things that caught me a bit off guard, like this one time where he sent me a link to a roleplay blog that he had made for some animal OC. For the record, I don't roleplay. I checked out the blog expecting some sort of joke, and then Tom proceeded to, in character, say how he wants to give me all of his love and that I'm really cute. I kind of played it off and didn't really think too much into it. I had tried to distance myself a little bit more because honestly, he was kind of a nuisance. It was beginning to become a chore to message him. One time he had called me some pet names like he usually did, and I went ahead and asked him how old he was. He said that he was 19. I told him that I'm 13 and I'd really appreciate it if he stopped calling me pet names and talking to me so affectionately. He told me that he was sorry and that he really didn't mean to make me uncomfortable. I said it was okay, but I was already thinking about asking some of my friends if this seemed normal. Long story short, a few of my friends didn't really think it was normal. I ended up blocking Tom and posting a long angry warning post all about him. A little while after I unblocked Tom though, another account who I'll call Ryan followed me. I didn't really think a lot of it at the time. By this time I was in 8th grade and I had about 1,000 followers on a pretty tense site of Tumblr. I mean, I got weird followers all the time. I did check out his blog though, and being the snoop that I am, I checked out his likes and follow list. To my surprise, he had only liked from and followed me. He had pages of my posts in his like section and I started to get a little worried. I sent him a message and then explained, "Hey, so this is probably nothing, but I'm a bit of a paranoid person. Can I ask you why you've only interacted with me on this site? I'm just curious." I remember his first response to this was, "Don't worry about me. I'm a good boy." Which definitely set me off guard, but I still kept persisting. I tried to ask him if he maybe had a previous account or any other social media presence so I could just make sure that he wasn't a creep. He had gave short replies saying that stating his past account names gave him anxiety. I started to get a little more aggressive in the conversation and then posted about it publicly. As the conversation was going on, he was liking and replying to these posts as well, saying things like he just wanted to talk to me. I really had enough, so I ended up blocking him and then writing him off as some internet illiterate weirdo. A couple of months later, my aunt died. It was a really rough time for me. I posted about it on my blog because that was really the only place that I feel like I could vent about it without being disrespectful, because I had been less than nice to my aunt in the recent years. Pretty much immediately after I was vocal about that, I started to get a lot of anonymous hate mail. It started out simple. It was loads of paragraphs about not liking my personality and how I was judgmental, which wasn't entirely wrong. And there were a lot of people that I'd gotten in a drama with who had plenty of reason to hold a grudge against me. So I wrote it off and responded jokingly, saying something to the effect of "screw off." It really wasn't a big deal at first. I really thought it was all jokes until the mail started getting more and more aggressive. At this point in the story, I should probably clarify that I'm a bisexual transgender man with some kind of neurodiversity. I started getting piles of mail calling me the F, T, and R slur. The comments had also got vaguely sexual as time went on, and this made me really nervous. Eventually I stopped replying to these altogether, realizing that this really wasn't a joke anymore. I later got an ask that was extremely sexual. It was about a paragraph long and it detailed how the sender had some kind of fantasy of me essentially being the dominant in a DDLG relationship, dressing up the sender and them calling me daddy. This ask sent me over the edge and I started to totally freak out about it. I ended up remaking my blog after I rigorously installed stat counters on all of my online accounts. I was really nervous, but I still wasn't aware of the gravity of the situation. I had said to my followers on a previous blog that they'd have to message me to find my new one. I checked my DMs to see if any of the friends were asking, and I saw a DM from a Hello Kitty themed blog. It was mostly empty with a few pictures of some pink dresses and candies on it. The blog was asking if they could find my new blog. I declined politely because I didn't know them. I went to check and see if they were a game account made to find my new blog, and sure enough, that blog had only been created for about an hour before they messaged me. At this point, it really started to sink in that I was being stalked online. I woke up the next morning to a message from the Hello Kitty themed blog telling me that he, Ryan, had found my new blog, and that he wanted me to off myself. I decided to check my DMs on my previous blog, and I saw two messages that read, "Fine, don't give it to me then." I panicked and moved blogs yet again. He kept finding me over and over, I assumed through friends. I could see on my stat counter that he'd stay on my blog for about 10 and 20 hours at a time, just scrolling through the pages. I think that he knew that I had a counter too, because he always made sure to visit certain more personal posts that I had made. One that I remember specifically was one where I was mentioning my huge fear of needles. There was also another time where he joined a small Discord server that I was a part of. Fortunately, my friends were able to spot how secretive he was being and then banned him. We later found out that the account was brand new, only made about 15 minutes before joining the server. Up until this point, I didn't mention anything to anyone I knew in real life. I was just way too embarrassed. I actually became convinced that I was going to get murdered by this guy. It felt like a certainty to me. I started giving up on life plans because I thought that I'd be dead in about a year or so tops. Sometimes at night I would barricade the doors and windows with any of the furniture I could move and just lay there wide awake. The whole ordeal decreased my mood significantly, and no one seemed to care. My grandparents told me that it wasn't really a big deal and that I shouldn't be online anyways. Just about all of the adults that I told about this pretty much just told me to ignore him. My mom was the only one who believed me, but even she had a limit with just how much she could tolerate my paranoia. I ended up deciding to report Ryan to the police, assuming he was in the States. I decided to look up laws about cyberstalking in my state, and began compiling a report of everything that had happened up until that point, including screenshots. I mustered up the courage to tell him to stop contacting me and accessing my blog. He never responded to these outright. His obsessive viewing still lingered for a while though. Then slowly, it started to happen less frequently. It was mostly over at that point. I felt a huge relief when I realized he wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore at every hour now. I never ended up reporting him to the police because the situation had died down. Later on though, I got really angry and curious and decided to try one last deep dive to find out who this guy really was. I had a really big hunch that he was Tom from earlier, who was really offended because I didn't return his affection. I ended up finding his DeviantArt. On his DeviantArt, he had posted a lot of art and writing about the mutilation of women and children. Not just 17 or 18-year-old teenagers, but 6 and 10-year-old children. When I went on his Twitter, I saw that he was obsessive over a 6-year-old girl from the anime Zatch Bell. He talked about how much of a virgin she was and just how much that he wanted to have sex with her. He also got really defensive when anyone implied that no, a 6-year-old anime girl is not going to have sex with you. He was also pretty aggressive, and he apparently had a few accounts that had been taken down for harassment. I also found out that his IP was actually banned on 2 servers for that same reason. To this day, I still look over my shoulder, both online and in real life, wondering if Ryan or Tom or whatever would be there. I've honestly considered reporting him to Interpol since he lives in Spain, but I've decided that nothing will probably come of it. So Ryan or Tom or whoever you really are, I really hope that I never encounter you online ever again. Okay, so this happened about 4 years ago when I was 16. I was super vain and really worried about my appearance. I always wanted to look so pretty, so I would go all out whenever I went out or took pictures. Curled hair, fake lashes, you know, the whole 9 yards. But I've since had kids and have a man who tells me I'm beautiful when I look like a hobo and never bother with makeup or anything anymore. Anyways, I had my Snapchat account set to public so anyone could watch my stories or snap me. I always figured, well, if someone's weird or something, I can just block them. Yeah, right. Well, one day I'm out to lunch with my mom when this random dude sends me a message. He says I'm so pretty and this and that and being super nice, but I don't really care to talk to him, so I'm just giving him one-word replies, hoping he'll get the hint because I honestly really hate being rude. Then he asks if I'll send him nudes. Absolutely not, and I tell him so. Well, he didn't really like that. He told me I was a hoe and that he hated women because they're all a bunch of sluts, and I'm just mad because no one likes me. Yeah, okay. I told him he was a psycho and then laughed at him, and he threatened to sue me for defamation. Yeah, right. So anyways, I thought that was the end of it. Well, it wasn't. I block the dude and go about my day like normal when someone adds me on Snapchat. I looked at the user info and their snap score was a 0. Their username was also something really weird. They don't send me any snaps or anything, but continue to watch my stories every single day. Fast forward a few months and this person snaps me. I was doing the same one-word replies because I didn't really feel like talking. You'd really think that I'd learned the first time, but nope. He starts with a nice small talk, whatever, and then out of nowhere, he sends me a couple of different selfies of myself that were posted to my story months ago. He asks if I can print them out for him and gives me the sizes that he wants them in, and then he tells me he'll give me his address to send them to. Hold up, what? I immediately shut it down, then the unthinkable happens. The guy sends me a couple of pictures of myself actually framed in his house on his wall. Oh hell no. I told him off real good and then I blocked him. Not too long after that, I get another random account that adds me. Another weird username. I then remove it and change my account settings. He still has my user, so he adds me from a million different accounts, which I won't add back. They were all super weird usernames. I won't give the actual usernames, but on Snapchat you can choose a display name, and all these were pretty similar to the usernames. One was I'm wet, and the other one was just add me back. Snapchat also tells you how the person added you, whether it's by phone number, user search, or quick add. Every single one of them said user search, so I know for a fact he searched it up. Every single account had a snap score of 0, so obviously they had just made the account. I just know it was him. So to the weirdo creeper who keeps adding my Snapchat years later because I won't send him nudes, you really need to take a hint already. Just leave me alone. My husband and I really love to go driving. We prefer road trips, but on the weekends or nights, whenever we have nothing better to do, we usually just go cruising and just drive around. We prefer smooth and not busy roads. On this particular night, we were really bored and decided to go cruising. We went up north to a small town about a half an hour from the city where the roads are really curvy and smooth. This town is pretty close to the mountains, and if you follow this particular main street all the way up north, it starts driving up to a mountain. It's about 9 p.m. and there are very few cars in the road already since it's a small, nice little cute town. But we keep going north, away from all of the houses and stores, and eventually where the roads start curving uphill. We drive for about 15 minutes more, and it's pitch black when we see some blinking lights. As we get closer, we see that there's a truck on the side of the road facing us. I'm getting the chills thinking about being all the way out here in the middle of nowhere, and there's a stranded truck on the side of the road. As he slowly approaches closer, I tell my husband that it's probably for the best to just turn back and that I had a really bad feeling. But at this point, we're pretty much right next to the truck. As he pulls up next to the truck, a young blonde guy, maybe in his late 20s, comes around and gets next to our window. I get such a bad vibe by this, and I tell my husband not to put the window down. I think that he also gets a weird feeling, so he actually listens to me. He kinda just loudly asks what's wrong, and the guy says something along the lines of something's wrong with his truck and that he might need a hand with it. His phone is also dead. My husband asks what happened, but the guy just insists on showing him and to come take a look. He says it very friendly, and he even calls him bro, and he says that he's really glad we pulled up. My husband tells him, "You know what, man, I really won't be much help. I don't really know anything about cars, but let me call someone to see if they can help you with this." The guy is insisting and he gets visibly upset. I'm looking back at the truck and I thought that I caught some movement inside of the truck. I tell my husband that I really think we need to go. Like, now. He probably saw the look of fear that was all over my face because he then put the car in reverse, but as he did that, the guy is now right behind our car. He's acting really stressed out and rubbing his face and kind of pacing. So my husband decides to go forward instead. We drive up for maybe about 2 minutes, trying to find a place to turn around since the road is so narrow. The road turns to a dirt road and there's a little more space on the side, so he's able to turn the car around. I'm absolutely dreading going back that way now, and our phones have no signal at all. In my mind, I know that this could all really be someone with car problems. Maybe there's a friend in the truck too. He never said he was alone, but I just can't help the really bad feeling that was in my gut. We soon reached the area where the truck had been, but there's no truck at all. We then drive down maybe another 5 minutes, but no trace of the truck, and we're absolutely sure that we passed the place where it would have been. Like I said, we didn't drive up too far to begin with. I'm both relieved and absolutely terrified that the truck was no longer there. If it really had broken down, how did they get it to work again in such a short time? Calming myself down, I'm telling my husband, hey, maybe they really did get it to work. Maybe it turned on all of a sudden and they were able to drive off. It's suspicious, but not impossible. As we keep driving though and the roads are straightening out, we notice far off the truck with all of the lights off and it's parked to the side again, and we notice some movement in the bed of the truck. I say out loud, why did they turn off all the lights? I think that we're still way too far away to see them, but we see two figures get on the other side of the truck and then crouch down as if they're trying to hide. We get closer and my husband floors it. As we drive past, the two men get up. One of them the guy we had spoken to, and the other someone else, with a very surprised look on both of their faces. One of them runs behind us for a bit and we see them getting tinier in the back. I keep looking back, absolutely terrified, but it's dark back there now, when all of a sudden I then see the headlights turn on in the truck. They then start driving in our direction and very fast. My husband keeps going fast and eventually we finally lose the headlights. I keep looking back the rest of the way, so scared that they're somehow still following us. Maybe they turned off their lights again and we just can't see them. Anyway, after driving for a very long time back to the city, we try to convince ourselves that no one's following us. We decide to call the non-emergency line and give them a description of what we saw. No, we didn't get the plates of the truck. It was all so fast, and in all of the fear, I just really didn't think to get them. We give a description of the guy we saw and the type of truck it was, but there was really nothing else that could really be done. Now, I realize that all of this could probably be rationalized, but in the moment, we were absolutely filled with terror. Being out there in the middle of nowhere and all the possibilities. They could have been armed. They could have put their truck sideways on the road and left us with nowhere to go. They could have put something out in the road to rip up our tires. And even though it could all have some sort of explanation, there's still so many questions. Why couldn't he tell us what was wrong? How did the truck work again so fast? Why did they turn off all of their lights, and why did they hide? It's been about a year and it's just a creepy experience now. We still go cruising, but we usually just stick to a little more civilized areas now. That is, at least for nighttime cruises. I used to ride a motorcycle as a sole method of transportation when I was studying, and I used to work on hotel cocktail bars during the summer holidays. About 6 years ago, I was working at a historic, stereotypically grand hotel in a very rural area of the UK. I worked a long afternoon and evening into the night. I finished cleaning up the bar around 2 a.m. and walked through the underbelly of the hotel to retrieve my motorcycle and make the journey home. I can still clearly remember the feeling of the crisp night air and the absolute pitch-black silence of the countryside after the hot and seemingly never-ending nights of serving drinks to all of the dinner-goers and party-goers. It was always sort of intensely relaxing, now that being adult meant not being scared of the dark or being outside on a motorcycle in the middle of nearly nowhere at 2 a.m. Riding through the local town took me a few minutes before I left to follow the dark country roads home. At this point in the story, I was riding a Honda 125cc, around 11 horsepower. Pretty basic and old but clean, and it did the job, regardless of its quirks, such as the dim headlight which would dim and flicker even more when coming to a stop. I was riding along these pitch-black roads with fields and woods surrounding me, and I was very much alone for about 20 minutes. Then out of nowhere, I saw a brief blast of bright blue headlights in my mirrors coming right behind me. Moments later, there were dazzling headlights that had arrived right behind me in seconds. Almost immediately, a large Range Rover then pulls out to overtake me, blasting past barely inches away from me. I decide to respond with a really long blast on my horn. Big mistake. The Range Rover pulls out in front of me and then slams on the anchors in what seemed like an attempt to have me lose control under sudden braking, or that they were trying to get me to rear end the range. Bikes can, even when they're old and rely on drum brakes, stop pretty quickly, so I didn't end up rear-ending the maniac in front. I came to a controlled stop. I see the door of the Range then crack open, and then a figure begin to step out. I went for it, using all 11 horsepower of the little Honda's power, pulling an overtake. However, in those moments, this angered crazed maniac had shut his door and then stepped on the accelerator, causing us to be completely level and accelerating together when I reached his car. He then started to run me off the road, pulling to the right and wedging me further over toward the ditch at the side of the road. This is where I ended up and struggling to control the bike on the wet, dew-heavy grass around the side of the road, trying to stop the 140-kilogram motorcycle from dropping into the ditch. I struggled to regain balance but managed to pull the bike back onto the road. At this point, I noticed that the guy had gotten out of the Range Rover and walked around to the back, opened it, and he was reaching inside for something. I had turned the bike to face the other side of the road, ready to turn either way and try to make an escape from the escalating situation. Just as I looked to turn, I took one more look over at him, to then see him pulling a large long object out of the back of the Range. I just went for it, taking another glance over my shoulder after about 200 meters to see that he'd begun to continue driving up the road away from where I'd run off at. I then slowed down to see what he'd do next after driving away from me. He reached the top of the road and pulled over to the left, waiting for me, the lights now reflecting on the road. It was absolutely eerie. My heart was beating so fast, yet it felt like time had stopped. I decided to just carry on in the opposite direction, trying to find an alternative route home in the pitch black. Right before doing this, I decided to check my phone for a signal, and I had no mobile coverage at all. Yeah, that was definitely one of the scariest nights I'd ever experienced. Back in September, I was taking hunter ed classes with my dad. Basically, you learn parts of a gun, how to handle it safely, etc. Since it was in person and not the online classes, the instructors had a lot of stories to tell. These were mostly about people not handling guns correctly, drunk shooting, etc. Most of them didn't end well. We were going shooting a lot those 2 weeks to prepare for the test at the end. One time we went to an abandoned town that a lot of people shot at. It had been shut down due to high lead levels. I had butterflies the whole ride there, but just brushed it off as nerves. Mistake number 1. During that evening, we were the only ones there. We thought that it would be pretty nice since there'd be more spots open. Keyword thought. We settled on a spot that was behind a hill and shot at another hill that was nearby. My dad was sighting the .22 gun that we had brought in. I was sitting behind him. I had my earplugs in, so it was really hard to hear things, especially far away. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was a very loud shot. It had to have been my dad since I was so close to him and it was so loud. I was initially pretty scared, as the above-mentioned stories we were told of shots being accidentally fired didn't really end that well. In a concerned voice, I asked if it was my dad. When he told me no, my fear became so much greater. Another shot was fired and our only thought was try to become seen. We quickly unloaded the gun so that it was safe and then ran up the hill. Mistake number 2. My mom was wearing bright yellow and we were all jumping up and down, waving our arms. There was absolutely no way that we couldn't be seen. After 2 or 3 more shots, we ran to the edge. It was kind of like a valley or a dried out lake. The edges were pretty high. We were at the bottom and the shooter was at the top. The next part confirmed our belief that he had seen us and still continued to shoot anyways. My dad decided to call the police to report what was happening. He decided to walk further out to see the details, like the color of the truck, how many people were there, etc. And then he was in full view of the shooter. Just a little bit after my dad got on the phone, the guy left, probably assuming the cops or other authorities were called. We're not too sure, but we're pretty convinced that he was shooting at us. We stayed where we were for a really long time, waiting for the police, when a group of maybe about 4 high schoolers showed up. My dad went and warned them about the previous events, and we decided after about 15 minutes of waiting and no police arriving that we wanted to get out of there ASAP. We went and gathered all of our things and then looked at where all the shots had went. The shots were no more than 25 meters away. As we were driving away, the police finally came. They asked us some questions and we were finally able to get the crap out of there. Whoever it was unfortunately never caught, and fortunately we never went back there. To this day, we don't really know if he was just trying to mess with us, trying to shoot us, or just drunk. But whatever the case may be, we were absolutely terrified when it all happened. So to the possibly drunk long-distance shooter, hopefully me and my family don't encounter you again. I remembered something that had happened to my best friend and I a few years ago, and I figured I would share it here. While my best friend and I were seniors in high school, we went on a weekend trip to visit my grandmother a couple hours away from my town in Georgia. The town that we lived in was comparatively small for the state, but one of the biggest towns within a few hours. But we had to travel about 2.5 hours through tiny, somewhat redneck towns to get to my grandmother's place. We were on our way back home when we had to stop at a gas station literally in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking cornfields, cotton fields, streets with no signs or lights, not even stop signs, and definitely no cell service. The convenience store that was attached to the gas station had maybe a couple snacks inside but looked deserted from the outside, and we decided not to bother to get anything other than gas. I paid with card, mainly because I didn't want to leave my 5'1", 100-pound friend all alone in the car while I went alone inside. Another car had pulled up on the other side of the single gas pump while I just started pumping my gas, and because of everything I'd read before on Let's Not Meet, I already had a really weird feeling and decided to stay alert and stand outside of the car with my driver's side door wide open. The reason I did this was so that my friend could see and hear everything that was going on. A thin, late 50s-ish older man got out of the car and seemed to be paying at the pump and standing beside his car while I got gas. But after a few seconds, he walked around the pump and then maneuvered himself around my car door to stand within a foot of me and asked if he could pump my gas for me. Luckily, the gas nozzle was locked, so it was pumping without me having to hold it. I immediately placed myself between the opening of the door and the man, and I prepared to either shut the door with me inside it or move and slam it behind me to protect my friend if necessary. I calmly told him it was fine and no thank you. He looked me up and down with the corner of his lip tilted up and then said,
"You know, pretty girls like you shouldn't be out here all alone, and you definitely shouldn't have to do this by yourself. Let a man help you, baby."
And then proceeded to cover my hand with his own as he reached for the gas pump that I was holding. I jerked my hand out from underneath his and then slammed my car door shut. I then jerked my hand out from underneath his and slammed my car door shut, thinking the last thing that I would want is him jumping in my car and driving away with my friend in the passenger seat. Red flags were totally going off now. My typical overly polite demeanor turned serious as I remember something that I'd read here that said that it was better to be safe and to seem mean rather than be polite and uncomfortable. So I then responded and said, "Sir, get away from me. I can pump my own gas and I've already said no thank you. Leave us alone." He didn't move, only raised his chin and managed to make eye contact with me, his tilted lip totally gone now. I stared him down and I figured I'd gotten enough gas to last us enough time to get the crap out of wherever we were. So I made eye contact, pulled the nozzle out, and basically threw it back into the pump before getting in my car and driving away before he had even moved. As we drove away, I glanced in the rear view and saw that his car wasn't even being filled up with gas. So I'm guessing he was just driving by and then decided to help out a damsel in distress, even though I was nowhere even close to being a damsel in distress. My friend was shaking the whole way home, telling me she would have just let the man pump our gas. But I'm really glad of some of the confidence that I'd gained from this sub. It helped me stay attentive and respond confidently enough to get out of that crazy situation. So to the creepy, helpful gas station man in the middle of Ghost Town, Georgia, hopefully we won't meet ever again. This happened about 5 years ago now. I had just gotten through a really rough breakup of a codependent relationship, so I was going through a phase of trying to be more independent, self-sufficient, and just generally more okay with being alone. I would go to a lot of movies, restaurants, etc., all by myself. At the time, I was living in Montana where spending time outdoors is a prime recreation. Camping solo seemed like it would be a really good exercise in truly being self-reliant. So I packed a little tent and went to Jerry Johnson Hot Springs. Jerry Johnson is a natural hot springs with a few small, mostly natural pools in the mountains on the border of Montana and Idaho. I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible, so I won't go on explaining the place. What I will say, however, is that it's truly in the middle of nowhere. From the interstate, it's about a 1/3 mile hike across the bridge and into the woods. And from the interstate, it's about a 45-minute drive in either direction before you reach any kind of civilization in the form of a gas station. There isn't a motel or anything attached to the hot springs like there are with some. It's really just forest land with a few tiny ponds of warm water, and if you ever go, you'll probably be the only person there. There's plenty of daylight, so I decide I'll go soak first and then set up my camp when I'm finished. I make the short hike to find that there's a couple, a man and a woman around their 30s in the main pool, and they look kind of startled to see me. I say a friendly hello from a distance as I then approach. At first, they don't really respond, they just kind of stare at me. Then the guy pipes up. "What are you doing, man?" I then tell him that I'm really confused and I don't know what he means. The man then asks, "Are you the one that's been creeping around the woods and watching us for the last hour or so?" I assured them that I didn't know what they were talking about, and they begin to tell me that there's someone in the woods way off of the trail. Apparently they'd been yelling at him and he just doesn't respond. He'll walk away into the woods for a while and then reappear somewhere else just watching them. After they've been assured that it isn't me, I get undressed and get into the water. The pupils in their eyes were huge. I'm guessing that they ate some magic mushrooms. I never asked, but it seemed pretty obvious. It's not a big deal. It's basically the perfect setting for something like that, but it makes me think that they might just be having a bad trip. We talk for a while, and first about the creepy guy and then about some other stuff. The mood lightens and they seem pretty relieved not to be alone. I'm a relatively large guy and I guess there's strength in numbers. No more sightings of the creeper. They get out of the pool before me. I'm in the pool all by myself for about 10 minutes before I then hear some shouting in the woods. I decide to cut my soak short just in case someone's in trouble. I get out, dry off quickly, and then get dressed, still mostly wet, when I then hear another shout. I then start quickly hiking. I eventually come across the couple that was shouting off into the woods and saying things like, "Hey man, we have a gun," which they didn't. I ask what's going on and they say that the guy was just ominously standing in the path looking at them way off in the distance. When they started to shout at him, he left the path again and then retreated into the woods. Now he's out of sight. Through all of this happening, they never get a good look at him. We walk back to our cars. We decide that we're all going to camp near each other. There's an official campground, but you have to pay. The guy tells me that he knows about another spot that's relatively flat that would probably work for us. I agree and I decide to follow them. It's not very far. They set up their tent and I set up mine about 100 yards away. I wanted to give them plenty of space to trip or whatever, and I was out there in the first place to camp alone. We were in a dry season on raw forest floor, so neither of us made a campfire. I got all set up and just sat around reading a book, really enjoying all of the nature. The mosquitoes made me retreat into my tent at about 6 p.m., and by 9 I was sound asleep. At about midnight, I was then awoken by the sound of screaming. I grabbed my flashlight and my .22 pistol, put on my shoes but didn't tie them, and then started running toward the other tent. When I arrived, the two were standing outside of the tent with their own flashlights and completely losing it. They said that the guy had been there and that we all needed to get the crap out of there ASAP. They showed me a slice in the wall of their tent that he had made with a knife. They then haphazardly packed all of their stuff in a hurry and we went back to the cars. I only then realized that I hadn't actually grabbed any of my own stuff. I asked if they would go back with me to get it, and they basically just said, "Sorry dude, you're on your own," then got in their car and took off. I then thought about it for a minute. I could come back the next day and get my stuff, but it was over an hour drive in each direction, and I was there now. I did have a gun, but if I shot someone in the woods, even if self-defense, that would be the beginning of another nightmare that would probably last the rest of my life. I made the decision and decided to go back for my stuff. I killed my flashlight and basically went stealth ninja mode back into the trees surrounding the clearing where my tent was. My thought was that if I was really quiet, then I could probably hear him, but he couldn't hear me. It took me about 20 minutes to get where my tent was since I was moving so slowly. When I got back to my tent, it was totally untouched. I quickly threw on my backpack, put my flashlight in my mouth, grabbed my tent in its fully assembled state with my sleeping bag still inside of it, and then ran back to the car with a loaded .22 revolver in my hand. I went back to my car, started it, and drove away. What didn't really occur to me until later is that I never actually saw this guy, and to this day, I can't really be sure that there was actually anyone in the woods at all. I really kind of doubt that these people would have sliced their own tent, but at the same time, I kind of doubt that there was actually just a dude hanging out in the wilderness all day and night just to freak these campers out. It's really possible that the two campers were really just messing around with me. If so, they really deserve Oscars for their performance, as they really seem genuinely terrified. I guess I'll never really know though. The story took place when I was 23 years old, so about 10 years ago. I was living in upstate New York in a very rural area with my ex-boyfriend and his family. He and I used to argue quite a lot. One morning before he went to work, he and I got into a very heated argument. He was 20 years my senior, but during this particular fight, he acted majorly juvenile. He jumped out of bed, flipped me the bird, and then yelled, "If you don't like it so much, then just go back to the Bronx." That was all the prompting I needed. I threw on my Uggs and my winter jacket, grabbed my cigarettes, and then flew out of the house. I'm unfortunately very impulsive, and I didn't think to grab my cell phone before I stormed out. I didn't drive, so my only option really was to walk. I don't think at the time that I intended to walk back to the Bronx, as it was a 3-hour car ride upstate, but I just really needed to go for an angry, dramatic walk. I realized that once I got to this road at the entrance of the trailer park that I had no idea where anything was around me, and I had only lived there for a few months at that point. And to be honest, we really didn't go out that often. I banked left and just walked and walked where I knew civilization was. I found myself walking alongside a very busy stretch of road, with 18-wheelers flying by and spraying me with slushy snow and totally soaking my shoes. I saw my then boyfriend driving by on his way to work, and he then sped up as he drove past me, evidently still angry about our fight. I thought for sure that he was going to turn around at some point, but he never came back. I pressed on, deciding instead to try to walk to my best friend's mother's house, which I knew to be in the same town. It started to snow and I was losing momentum. I passed a VFW where a nondescript pickup truck was then parked in the driveway. It wasn't until I had passed it that I had even realized the driver was in the front seat. He called out to me,
"Hey honey, do you need some help?"
My stomach churned, realizing I would have to accept this stranger's offer. I approached his truck very slowly and tried to weigh out my options. He was a clean-cut, seemingly normal older white guy. Gray hair, greenish blue eyes, just average. I blurted out, Are you a good guy or a bad guy? And I absolutely cringed at myself for asking such a dumb question. He answered,
Well, I'm a good guy. I mean, I wouldn't really tell you if I was a bad guy, though.
I ignored all of the bells that were going off in my head and got in the front seat with them. As we drove, I realized I had no clue where my friend's mom actually lived. I knew the name of the road she lived on, but it spanned a good distance, so it wasn't very helpful in terms of finding my destination. I asked to borrow a cell phone so that I could try calling my best friend to ask her where the heck I was going. I called her about 3 times and she didn't answer because I guess she didn't recognize the number. I started to feel inexplicably hopeless. After a few minutes, he asked me where I was from and why I was out in the middle of nowhere in the snow wearing pajamas. I then went on to explain that I was originally from the Bronx and that I had gotten into a fight with my boyfriend. He then paused and then he said,
So, you wouldn't be interested in making a little money, would you?
I chuckled nervously and just said, no. Thanks though. He then responded,
Well, I figured since you said you were from the Bronx.
And then trailed off. Realizing at that point that I was almost definitely in deep crap, I muttered, Oh, sure. He eyed me up and down and then laughed to himself before sneering.
Sure, she says.
I started to panic big time, but I knew that I couldn't show my fear. I scoured the scenery for a pillowy snowbank that I could probably land in if I leapt out of the truck to no avail. All of the houses were so few and far in between. I became certain that this would be how I met my demise. I'll never know why, but it was at this point that he decided to ask me who I was going to see. I quickly blurted out my best friend's mom's name and her husband's name. He instantly perked up and explained that he knew the husband. I felt the greatest wave of relief when he explained that he knew exactly where his old buddy lived. When we finally pulled up to that big yellow house, it was like arriving to the promised land. I sheepishly decided to ask his name.
Steve,
he said, and then he asked mine. I gave him a fake name, spat out a bullcrap thank you, and then ran as fast as I could from his truck to the porch. I crashed through the front door and then locked it behind me. I immediately started crying and running through the house trying to find my friend's mom. I had actually awoken her from a really deep sleep, but she didn't say a word about it upon seeing how shaken up I was. Once I knew I was safe with her, I then went on to explain everything. The fight, the fleeing, and the weird guy and his sexual proposition, and she listened, horrified and curious at the same time. She made me promise to never do anything so reckless like that ever again, and if I needed her, to just call her. She told me that she would ask her husband when he got home about this Steve guy and find out more about him. I returned to my boyfriend's a little while later that same day, and I got really stoned, just trying to forget about all of the events that happened that morning. The following day, my friend's mom called me to tell me that Steve was a really dangerous person. Her husband had actually cut off communication with him years ago. The last he heard about Steve was that he apparently got arrested for assault. She then went on to point out how incredibly easy it would have been for him to hurt me and leave me just about anywhere on some lonely stretch of road, and no one would even know where to look for me. Not to mention that I might not have even been found until the snow thawed out. It was a pretty terrifying experience. So I have an update. Upon sharing this post with the best friend of mine mentioned in this story, she reminded me that I left out a super unsettling detail. When her mom called, she was able to tell me Steve's last name. One of the first results on Google with his name plus the town's name brought me straight to a registered sex offender website with a mugshot of him. His eyes looked cold and empty, and I realized with him being on probation at the time, he would have been especially eager to not have me get him in any further trouble with the law. Her mom said it best when she told me that I must have had some serious guardian angels looking over me. So Steve, you disgusting creep, let's never encounter one another again. Me and my girlfriend were in a city in Texas right off the highway, and we stopped at a tiny little gas station to get some beer and chips and such. For some reason, when we pulled in, I felt the need to say, "I actually think I need to come in with you this time," which was really weird because I usually always stay in the car whenever we go places, or if I do get out, I don't ever feel the need to announce it. When we walked in, everything felt normal. We were kind of just laughing and joking around about the half-naked Modelo girl cutout had a super pixelated face. We then started looking at all of the beer, and I was being really indecisive, but could tell that we were both getting really sketched out, so I just grabbed 2 coconut margarita type drinks without even thinking about it and rushed to the counter, thinking that we needed to get out of there really quickly. There was this growing feeling of being watched. It was like pure malice that I haven't felt before. I can't really describe it. There was an old Hispanic man leaning on the ice cream cooler right by the counter and pretty much watching every customer. Everything just felt slow. It's hard to explain. When I put my things on the counter, the man started smiling at us really wide and then started talking in a very strange manner. It was like he was trying to be charming or personable, but really just came off as really creepy. Outside the door, I could see a man in a red jacket, also just staring through the doors, just watching and waiting. It was pretty obvious now. These men were waiting for us. It's really hard to explain the overwhelming feeling of dread that we had, and I didn't really talk about it until we were driving out of the parking lot. The man in the red jacket was still circling the building and watching us as the car drove off. The city we were in, it has a pretty bad reputation for having a lot of human trafficking victims coming in and out, and I honestly think that they were just waiting to find the perfect victim. I honestly think that if I hadn't gone in with my girlfriend when I did, she probably would have been taken, or maybe they would have taken me from the car. I've never had such an intense looming feeling of doom and paranoia in my life. It seems very mundane, but it was definitely a very close call. We kept discussing it the rest of the night. We're really lucky that we went in together and got out as quick as we could. I mean, who knows what could have happened. So this was about 2 years ago on Halloween. My best friend and I were leaving a club in Dallas, and we stopped at a gas station to pick up some snacks and refreshments. The guy comes up to me and then tells me that I look pretty. At this point, I'm pretty drunk and I'm not really worried about a dang thing, so I just thank him, smile, and continue looking for munchies. He then starts to follow me through the gas station, but I kinda just shrug it off at the time. Me and my friend pay, and we're walking out when he comes up behind us and asks where we're going. At this point, I'm just thinking, screw off. We say that we're going home, and he seemed to take the hint and left us alone. My friend was planning on driving us home in my car since I was really unfit to drive. We're about 3 blocks from my car when we notice a car driving really slow right behind us. We glance back a few times, and that's when we realize it's the guy from the gas station following us. We decide that it's not a good idea to lead him back to my car, so we decide to turn around and walk a different way back towards the street where the clubs are. He makes an illegal U-turn and follows us. He then rolls down his window and then shouts at us, asking if we need a ride. I then politely say, "No thank you, we're good. I think we just made a wrong turn." Lo and behold, he continues to follow us. We speed our pace up a bit and he speeds up. He calls out to us again through the passenger window, asking again if we want a ride. I tell him to please stop following us or I'm gonna have to call the police. He then proceeds to call me a really nasty name before taking off. Yeah, so to the weird guy from the gas station that decided to follow us, hopefully we don't encounter you again. So one day about 2 years ago, I was at my house with my younger sister and our friend. We were about 20 to 21 years old at the time and all females. We were really hungry and decided to go out and get some sushi. On the way to the restaurant, I noticed that I was really low on gas, so I stopped to get some. I pulled up to the pump and parked the car. I went into the gas station to pay while my sister and our friend waited in the car. As I was walking across the parking lot into the store, I noticed a man that had started staring at me with a really creepy smirk on his face. We made eye contact and he yelled across the parking lot,
"Hey beautiful, why aren't you smiling?"
I didn't respond or even acknowledge him. However, a young woman happened to witness this and then said to him, "Don't tell her to smile. Leave her alone. She doesn't have to do anything for you." To this day, I still sometimes think about that woman. I then thanked her and continued to walk into the store. As I then stood patiently in line, the same man walked inside. He came right over to me pretty much instantly while I was in line and started to touch me. He started to rub my arms and lower back, and then I pulled away. I said loudly, "Get away from me, I don't even know you. Do not touch me or I will defend myself." Some of the other customers and the cashier were watching us. I caused a scene. He whispered in my ear that I need to shut up so that people don't think he's a creep. Suddenly the man ran out of the store and right to my car where my sister and friend were still inside of it. I ran after him. He opened the car door and started to say something to them when I yanked him back so hard from his shirt collar and then punched him in the face. He then proceeded to call me just about every other vulgar name in the book, but he did leave us alone, then got in his car and drove away. I'm really glad that's all that happened. I'm much more aware of my surroundings now. When I was around 17 to 18 years old, I was driving home from a friend's house after a movie marathon. It was around 1 a.m. when I left and a pretty decent drive. Not quite halfway, my gas light comes on. I had a few creepy catcall experiences at gas stations and I was a little paranoid stopping that late in the middle of nowhere as a 110-pound female. In the end, I think if I wasn't so cautious, I probably would have been kidnapped or worse. The first gas station that I came across was pretty well lit and in a pretty open space. I drove up to the pump and looked around my car mirrors before getting out. As I was starting to pump the gas, this normal-looking guy comes out of the gas station shop and then starts smoking a cigarette. The pump kept clicking off and not working, so I started messing with it, trying to get it to pump. This guy then starts watching me and laughing. I assumed that he was just laughing to himself while watching a teenage girl trying to pump gas. After getting maybe about a fourth of a gallon, I decided to give up and move to a different pump. After this point, if I wouldn't have absolutely done everything that I did, I probably would have been screwed. When I got back into my car, I locked my doors just to drive to the other pump. I checked all of my mirrors before getting out and shutting off my car again. And that's when I saw the guy walking up to my car. He was smiling, and he was then walking up to the driver's side window. Not wanting him next to me, I rolled down the passenger window. He kind of paused for a moment, then just smiled to himself and walked to the passenger window. He then stuck his head all the way inside my window to talk to me. The conversation went as followed.
"Hey, I know this seems really weird, but I promise I'm not a creep or anything. My car broke down and I really need a ride home. It's just a half a mile up the road."
Sorry, but I don't really know you like that.
"Oh no, I totally get it. I thought it was pretty weird as I was walking up here, but it's only a half mile up the road. I'm totally stranded."
I really wish I could help you, but again, I really don't know you.
"Yeah, I got you. If you had a truck or something, I'd offer to ride in the back."
Sorry, no, not happening. All of a sudden, he looks really pissed off. He yanked at my door, but I had already had it locked from before. Then he decided to reach for my inside door handle right through the window. My car was still running, and I slammed it into first gear and then pulled out as he opened the door. The car taking off slammed it shut, and I sped off. I then called the police after I got away. They looked at the gas station's cameras, and right after I left, he got into his red SUV and drove off. If I hadn't locked my doors the second time, I would have been screwed. If I let him come to the driver's side window, he would have grabbed me. If I had shut my car off, I wouldn't have been able to drive off in time. And if I didn't double check my mirrors, I would have been outside my car when he came up to me. I'm really fortunate for being so cautious. It honestly probably saved my life that day. One day after work around 4 or 5 p.m., me and a girl I worked with decided to go and see a movie. It was a rough shift and her and I felt like a movie would be really nice. She asked if we could stop by her house so that she could change her clothes from our work uniform. I said that's fine since it was maybe about 5 minutes away tops. We stayed at her house a bit, then we ate a quick snack and got in my car. She asked if we could stop by the gas station by her house so that she could grab a Red Bull. Once again, I was fine with that because it was near her house. I drove to the gas station and the only parking was on the side of an abandoned car wash next to the gas station. To form a better image, the gas station and car wash were right next to each other, both entrances facing the same way. It was entirely dark outside. The gas station was a fairly run-down one and didn't have any lights at the gas pumps like most do, so it was mostly pitch black except for the light that was coming from my car. There was a semi-truck that was on the other side of the gas station. There were also some cones there that were indicating that the area would inhibit the driver to do what he needed. So I assumed the parking spots wouldn't be too close, and I parked. My friend got out and went inside, and I decided to stay in the car since she would only be a few minutes. I locked my doors after she got out as it was a forced habit to do so. I went on my phone a bit, and after a couple of minutes, I saw a light flash on the driver's side mirror of my car. I turned to look since it was pointed right in my direction. The truck driver had a flashlight pointed at my window, and he kind of just held it there for a few seconds. I was kind of freaked out, but assumed that he had a reason for doing so. He then began walking towards my window, still with the flashlight on. I rolled down my window no more than an inch, assuming that maybe he was just going to tell me to move my car. He then stopped when he got about 2 to 3 feet away from my window, then just turned around. At this point, I was pretty scared, just because there was no reason for what he did, so I just rolled my window back up and waited for my friend. I'm still watching the guy just in case, and I see him rummage around in the front part of the semi-truck for a little bit. Then he stopped and turned back to my car. There was something in his hand, but I'm not sure what, and I'm really glad I don't know. He then began walking towards my window, and he was saying something, and it was at a rather loud volume. He got to my door this time and tried to open it. He kept trying to pull the handle a couple of times, but he couldn't open it. Then he started to pull it a little more aggressively. My friend came out of the gas station and she was walking towards my car. She looked scared. I was also scared. The guy saw her come into my car and walked quickly back to his truck, and I then drove away as quickly as possible. I'm not entirely sure what happened or what was going to happen or what he was trying to do. The only good theory that me and my friend had was that maybe he saw that I was a girl and that I was alone and assumed that I would be a good target to kidnap or something. That's just a theory though. I'm really glad that I won't ever have to find out what he was actually doing. So as some background, my family live about a state away from me, and at the time that this happened, I had just turned 18 years old. And my mom would finally let me drive to go see them, which was about a 5.5-hour drive. No biggie. I was like, bet, I can smoke and drive that easily. And I did just that. About halfway there, I needed to stop to get some gas and get snacks. As you can guess, I had the munchies. I wasn't really familiar with the drive or where the gas stations were on the way there, and they were kind of spread out. So as soon as I felt like it wasn't smart to wait until I found another gas station, I pulled off the highway. I've always been sort of suspicious of people in general because I've not had an easy childhood. I grew up learning just to kind of feel when things are not right. So I wasn't really worried about being by myself because I knew how to handle myself. So I pull up to this relatively empty gas station, maybe 1 or 2 other cars, but it was a larger one with one of the antique shops in it. I parked at a pump, locked my doors, and go inside. There was no one at the counter yet, and there was a sign on the counter saying that they would be right back. So I just go and pick out a snack and a drink. Well, when I previously walked in, I noticed a man, late 20s, kind of just wandering around in the store. I saw him glance over at me when I walked inside, but didn't really think about it. Not really paying him any kind of attention, I went and opened the door to the soda when he comes right up next to me and opens the one next to mine. This wasn't particularly weird to me, but the fact that he was literally all the way across the store when I came in, and then as soon as I go over there, he does too, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go look for a different drink. So I go to the tea section and stand there for a sec, and he follows me to the one right next to me yet again. Only this time he looks at me, smiles a really creepy closed-lipped smile, and then says,
"Hi there."
I do also want to say that even though he could have easily just been trying to be nice or flirt or something, I had an instant creepy vibe from him when he first walked over, and that intuition has never failed me before. At this point, I just look at him, nod my head, then grab something and go to the counter, thinking to myself that I can just grab a snack later. He comes right up behind me with just one of those jerky sticks. Literally didn't grab even anything from the refrigerators that he was looking in right next to mine, and just stands super close to me. And I mean, he was literally right up behind me. I could feel his body heat and his breath on the back of my neck. I'm literally just waiting for this freaking cashier to hurry up and come in here so I can get the heck away from him. So I decide to start calling for someone. No one answers or comes out. The dude behind me is texting on his phone, and he's just looking around and at the door, like he's waiting for someone. Finally, I'm just like, screw it, I'm out of here. I leave my drink on the counter and walk out. He follows me. At this point, I literally run to my car, and I remember feeling him grasp my jacket, but with the momentum of my arm swinging, he wasn't able to get a firm hold on me. I hop in and lock the doors, turning my car in record speed. We make eye contact, and out of the corner of my eye, I can see two men run from around the corner of the gas station. All three of them run at my car, which is not very far from where the first guy is, and I just floor it out of there, almost nearly wrecking my car on the corner. I don't know what they were planning on doing, but I imagine I was about to get kidnapped. I called the police because I don't know where the cashier was, and I just had a really bad feeling that they did something to them. By the time the police got there, they were gone. I now always carry a knife on me whenever I go on that drive. So this happened last night. I'm a 21-year-old female, and I was at the office later than normal, but not excessively late. I left at about 6 and realized I needed gas, so I decided to stop at the gas station that was about 2 minutes away from my job. It was still pretty light out because of summer, which made the whole situation even weirder. I go to this gas station and nothing has ever happened before, so I was pretty relaxed and just tired in general from work. While I was pumping gas, there was a truck with two guys that pulled up in front of my car, but perpendicular. Weird, but I just kept filling my car so that I could head home. The two guys just looked like two normal guys from the country. They were a bit older, around 40s and 50s, but I still felt a little uncomfortable. The guy driving was talking softly, but I just kind of ignored him at first. I honestly didn't even realize he was even trying to talk to me. The guy then yelled at me, which really caught me off guard. I think I said something along the lines of, can I help you? The driver was then motioning for me to come closer to talk, which I didn't because I just felt really off about the whole thing. The guy finally spoke at normal level and said that they were looking for the shortest covered bridge. Now, this wasn't too weird of a question because it's a little hard to find without a map. Briefly, I told the guy the directions from the gas station and was grabbing my receipt. This is when all of my red flags totally went off. The driver then asked if I would lead them there. It was out of my way, so I said no and started to get in my car. He then yelled at me, spoke really loudly, saying that I could leave my car and go in their truck to direct them there. Then I wouldn't have to waste my gas or something. Just the thought of that made me really scared. I got in my car and I didn't respond. The truck didn't move, so I had to back out. I was pretty worried about them following me. They did follow my car out, but I took a few random side streets rather than drive right to the highway. Oh, and also, during the whole time of this, the passenger was just staring at me. Also really creepy. The whole thing was really weird, and them trying to get me in the car just really scared me. I ended up calling the non-emergency police line to give them a description of the truck and to let them know that they tried to get me in their vehicle. Either way, it's the creepiest thing I've ever experienced.